Hello, I'm Moni Vargas, the Creative and Program Director at Breakthrough, a nonprofit culture change organization that uses media, arts, and tech to promote human rights. Welcome to Breakthrough Spotlight, our weekly video and podcast series featuring conversations with community leaders, activists, artists, and partner organizations working to build a world that is more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable for all. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome. My name is Katrina. I'm a community engagement intern here at Breakthrough. Joining me today is Rozina Gilani from ATL Radical Art. Hi.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Could you just talk a little bit about what ATL Radical Art is and what exactly makes it radical?
Of course. We are a locally based, Atlanta-based art collective. And we consist of artists across mediums. The common thing that we share is our messaging, and our messaging is of liberation across different issues, but intersectional, of course. And we use our medium to address issues of empire and oppression. What makes us radical is that we are more invested in abolition rather than reform. We are anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-cop, anti-prison, anti-misogyny. We're much more interested in dismantling systems and recreating a community-based vision for our future. So we do that, in several ways. We've existed for 2 years now. So over the past 2 years, it's looked different, but most of our art is in the public space, in an interventionist style, guerrilla art. In the streets, at events, showing up to reclaim space and take control of the narrative so that we are telling our own stories.
So cool. Thank you for sharing that. What is the breadth of different social topics, both local and global, that artists cover in their art?
So because our artists are coming from various communities, various backgrounds, we have a very internationalist approach. I would say all but just a few of us are people of color, most first generation, and so we hold dear the struggle of our people in our communities that may not be in the US. So what that means is we are talking about, Islamophobia, wars in the Middle East. My personal work has a large focus on Palestine. And of course, there are so many issues that are very particular to the home that we live in. So right now, the sort of heightened focus on the Black Lives Matter movement. We have, we have actions every week where a lot of our Black leaders in the collective are going forward with their art to lead this movement. And the collective is very much focused on the sort of allyship and accomplice relationship with our members. So it's really just all over the place in terms of topics. I think that's what makes us unique, in that each of us have our own solo work that we produce, and a lot of it is tied to our own identity. But when we come together, we're showing up to kind of connect the dots and understand how our struggles are so very tied together and oftentimes overlap. With the recent blast in Beirut, there was an extreme need to help our comrades there through fundraising and relief support. So we were able to bring in a lot of our collective members to host a telethon. We're getting creative with a lot of more virtual programming, but it's a lot of it's kind of rapid response. So we have to see what's going on every day and who's got the art to address the issue and to uplift and move people towards action.
So what unique power do you think artists hold in activist spaces?
Broadly speaking, art is, as it's always been called, a global language, right? It's where words fail us. ways of expressing through movement and imagery can kind of fill in those, those disconnects that language often creates. So that's kind of like the big, broad, almost vague answer. But I would say when it comes to protest art and more specifically intervention art, it allows for a very visceral experience. Oftentimes when we watch, consume art, there is a sort of binary of audience and performer. When you look at protest art, it takes on a different form because it necessarily forces you to engage. A lot of our stuff has been in format of simulation. So people are going through experiences, in engaging and consuming our art. They're actually putting in the position of experiencing oppression that they may have never come across in their life. That makes it real in a whole new way. And I think in times where, especially in the US, because we are so diverse, because experiences and lived experiences are so drastically, different from one another, it's easy when you go to a place, for example, like Palestine. Palestinians know the conditions that they live under. You're never having to convince another Palestinian that Israeli apartheid exists, But here, for the average person who maybe doesn't have a very diverse group of friends or is in community with people who are not like them, they're encountering, marginalized communities for the first time. Especially right now, you're seeing a lot of people being activated through the protests. And that process has looked a lot like a very uncomfortable transformation. And I think that art can kind of serves as a catalyst for that transformation because it brings you into the experience rather than keeping you in this position of remaining witness. I think that there is just such an immense power for art to invoke empathy that other forms of education just simply can't, due to the nature of how meaning is transmitted. And I think art just has that biasly, like art has that magical capacity that we're finding to be very instrumental in moments of revolution. It's always been that way, actually. So
being based in Atlanta, how has everything around COVID affected your community and how Atlanta Radical Arts has been organizing?
So Atlanta is not responding well. Lockdown wasn't taken seriously. This whole period of quarantine has been really relaxed here, which has resulted in just a sustained and oftentimes, escalating COVID count number. And I think that has put, everyone and artists, since we're talking about our artists, in a tricky situation because we're really limited in how much we can do together physically. And yet at the same time, with all of our protests happening here, a lot of us are having to kind of take the risk. Fortunately, our community are also the community that are really particular about masking up and taking, all the precautions. So I want to say that we're not doing nearly as much as we could. Those who are most affected are also the most vulnerable in our communities, which makes our work even more important because we're not just actors, we're not just artists, we're also activists, and we're out there, we're organizing our communities, we're providing relief locally. It's just imperative at this point. And unfortunately, a lot of our effort has gone into responding to the, irresponsible responses from our local government. We are daily putting more people at risk. So it's just the work is really cut out for us every which way. We've got unlimited things to protest every single day. I don't think silver linings is the phrase, but we are growing stronger as a community as well because of it.
After working with Atlanta Radical Art over the past 2 years. What are like some like lessons you've learned through this kind of work, and what are some things that you'd like to pass down to young artists like me who are new to activism and are new to joining that with their work?
So I actually come from a background as a, solo artist. Collaboration, yes, during like my very early years when I was studying dance, I was always with other dancers. But after, I reached a mastery level, I've been solo. And when I, was living overseas for a while, when I moved back, I just really craved a community. And it's definitely so much more fulfilling working in community. I like to encourage young artists who are, especially those artists that are in school right now, to, and the thing is, like, I was also always, since high school, interested in community organizing and social justice. So like those two worlds were always something that inevitably had to cross paths. And I know that that's not the story with every person studying art, but I think as a protest artist, it is kind of my like natural inclination to like push artists towards, feeling a responsibility to address social issue through their work. So I continue to do that when I interact with students. Every artist has something to say. I think that that's not something they necessarily teach you in school, but it is, especially if you're going to contribute to your community, your art almost necessarily has to have a message. And so my advice, or my like nugget of wisdom, would be to really examine how you move through the world, and whether it's through a or several positions of privilege, or the opposite, to kind of explore yourself through the arts, but not in a vacuum from the world that you live in. Because I think that is definitely something that's encouraged, right? To find yourself through your arts. There's never a shortage of that. Every artist is very, very much finding themselves in their art. But how they live in relationship to their world is something that I think can help us create more honest work that encourages these conversations around building empathy. A way to do that is to find community. And it's hard to do that when you're a solo artist, or, you're a painter and you only work on your own stuff. And like, yeah, it can be really difficult to see how, to bridge that to another person's work and find those sort of like common messaging. But I think it's worthwhile the effort. And yeah, I've found that anything I make now is just, 100 times better than anything I could create alone, because it's a shared experience in creating, but also in the message itself.
Given that we're also experiencing, a national reckoning on racial injustice, how is Atlanta Radical Art participating in this movement?
Like I said, we've been on the streets a lot lately, either hosting an event or co-hosting. Our social media presence has fortunately grown a lot in the past few months. So even if we aren't, taking the lead on a certain action, we are promoting heavily for our friends across different groups. So a lot of the stuff we do is in coalition, and there are obviously a difference in tactics and strategies. We're not all doing things the same way, but so long as we line up on, our core values and principles, we want to make sure that whoever's following us gets out to these very important events. So I would say that we have hosted, but also supported a lot of the movement in Atlanta. A lot of our artists belong to several groups as well. So it's important to know that, like, we are, we're collective, and there's a lot of autonomy in what we do as individuals. So not all of us are at everything. Not all of us are, organizing on behalf of ATL Radical Art. Some of us are DSA members or Students for Justice in Palestine, BLM. Like, there's just a lot. We're all doing a lot. We're very organically coming together, and ATL Radical Art is just kind of an overlap for a lot of people, and as well as a lot of new people. So a lot of these newer people we're talking about, the younger folks that are feeling that, fire in the belly, they're coming through ATL Radical Art to these events. And again, I think a lot of it is because it's the arts. It's because it's a kind of, I don't think that what I produce is easy in terms of like art consumption, but I think that people feel a little bit more comforted when it comes to speaking about social justice through art or through culture. I think there's this idea that there's a distance from like the political nature, which there isn't. I mean, not at all. Not in terms of our collective, but it's felt that way, I think, for a lot of people. So they come through us, they show up, and before you know it, we're radicalizing people.
I know that you had mentioned how you always had an interest in like social justice and topics around that. So it was inevitable that it would just collide with your art at some point. But was there like any like tipping point for you that really pushed you to start like this kind of like radical art? And what is currently giving you like hope or inspiration or fuel right now?
So I'd been studying dance since I was started walking. But somewhere, in high school, I started taking more of an interest in social issues, particular to the Middle East. I grew up Muslim. And then when I got to college, I was studying Arabic, and I had an opportunity to go to the Middle East. And so after a couple of visits, I was, really was invested in going to Palestine. And I did a few months of volunteering at a local NGO, a Palestinian Canadian NGO. And one of their partners was a local circus school. So I started teaching dance there. And I fell in love with Palestine, you could say. I just absolutely fell in love. And I, formed family and friends there. And I realized how much of a sanctuary that circus school was for the people in that community. And I was part of that, and so I think that was the moment where I was like, my worlds don't have to exist separate, fighting for human rights, fighting for equality and equity, like that is not separate from the sanctuary that comes with creating art. Because what we ended up doing was a sort of elaborate show where we were combining the dance styles that I teach with, the local dance team there. And there were a lot of conversations that came out of that about, the power of art to heal and to reconcile. And so I started going a little bit deeper in from there, looking at, because I studied Indian classical dance, and it's used as a tool for storytelling. So it was just perfectly lends itself to art testimony. And I started working more along those lines. And when I went back to Palestine, I got to work with groups and help storytell through movement. So that kind of took off. And then, just coming back into my communities and working on local issues, I realized that I didn't want to consider these things separate from each other. Like, I feel like I kind of grew up on that idea, but I realized the capacity of them to like basically work together. And that kind of guided me through over the years. And when I finally moved back to Atlanta in 2016, I was really eager to find that community and to start working on projects like this. And I got lucky. I got really lucky to find, I just had a call for artists for one of my first shows here. And most of the artists that responded were very eager to be part of a community like that. And and we've been creating ever since. And I would say that the whole process of being in community has been very hopeful. And seeing how we've grown and seeing like the type of enthusiasm of folks who come out to our programming, who want to get involved, who just appreciate the work that we make, because it kind of, changed their mind on an issue, or, it started a conversation between them and their community, because, again, art seems very easy to engage with. So it wasn't a hard sell, but once they got there, maybe their friends were confronted with content that they had never really thought much about. So just seeing, again, the capacity for it to transform and build, sort of community centered around aid has been very inspiring and very, keeps me optimistic. Art in and of itself is not going to fix anything, but the capacity for it to serve as a catalyst, I think, definitely is becoming more clear for me as an artist, as an organizer.
You had used the word accomplice, and that may be a term that's new to some people in our audience. Could you just speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think that a term more people are familiar with is ally, and it's definitely a good thing to be an ally. The suggestion is that it's not enough. So an ally is someone who stands by you, right? Someone who will show up to the protest, will put their Black Lives Matter sign in front of their yard, and be very like visible and vocal about their support for your fight for justice and liberation. An accomplice, just as the word is defined, as someone who actually fights alongside you to dismantle these structures. So I think the key component is the proximity to the fight, and also like where the direction comes from. So an accomplice is very invested in the sort of the plan that you have for your own liberation. So a lot of times allies will worry about, for example, the way we fight, the strategy, the tactic, and there are limitations to what they will show up to, depending on how you decide to speak up. An accomplice is there to take your lead and listen to how you think your community needs to break free. And they're there for you, sort of that ride or die, accomplice, and they're invested in supporting you more proactively. So I like to use the word accomplice because the folks that are in our community, in our collective, who are not people of color, are accomplices. They are showing up to show up in all the ways that we need them to. A lot of times I like to kind of compare an ally as someone who wears the safety pin, to say like, I'm a safe space. You can come and talk to me. There's no judgment. But there isn't much, it's a very passive way of being in solidarity. An accomplice is someone who's going to ask you, all right, can the safety pin actually liberate you? No, it's actually just a symbol, right? So what do we need to do to be there and be useful? I guess you can say very plainly. So that's what we mean by having or by seeking accomplices.
So thank you, Rozina. It's been really great to speak with you about your art and your activism. And thank you to our audience for tuning in today. We hope that you'll follow ATL Radical Art on their website and on their social media, and that you'll join us for the next episode of Breakthrough Spotlight.